Hello, my amazing students. This is Mrs. A, and we are going to be doing lesson 25, which is multiplying and dividing decimal numbers. Now, I'm trying something new. We're using a different method to teach this lesson, and I'm going to see what you like the most, okay? This should be a little bit neater than what I usually give you. Okay, so here we are to multiply decimal numbers with pencil and paper. These are instructions. We do not need to align the decimal points. Remember that with addition and subtraction, we must align the decimal points. But now we're talking about multiplication and division. We do not need to align the the decimal points. We instead multiply to find the product, and then we count all of the decimal points in the factors to locate the proper position for the decimal point in the product. Mr. A is being silly. Decimal places are places to the right of the decimal point. You are going to have him scratch me. In part A of the example below, we show the same multiplication in decimal form and in fraction form. So here we go with part A. So here we have simplify 0.3 times 0.12. Now, what we're going to do is see how to do that with decimals. Okay, so first of all, we have fractions. And 0.3 is 3/10. And 0.12 is 12/100ths. And when we multiply them, we're going to end up with 36 in the numerator, and 10 times 100 is 1,000 in the denominator. Now 36 divided by 1,000 is the fraction, which would simplify because they're both divisible by 4 at least. Okay, or here we're doing the same thing with decimals. We have 12/100ths, which is 0.12, and 3/10ths, which is 0.3. And when we look at this, 12 times 3 is 36, but we have 1, 2, 3 decimal places in the product. So 0.036. Okay, so because we have 1, 2, 3 decimals in the factors, we're going to have 1, 2, 3 decimal places in the product. We count over 3 places from the end of the product, always starting from the right end and moving left. So 1, 2, 3 places, and we put the decimal point. The product is 0.036, and it is equivalent to 36/100ths. 0.036 is equivalent to 36 over 1,000, which is what we got when we did it with fractions. Now, go to the next page. Now we're doing 1.5 squared. This is the B part of that example. So 1.5 squared, we're going to multiply 1.5 by 1.5, which you can see right here. 1.5 times 1.5. When we multiply 5 times 5, we get 25. Carry the 2. 1 times 5 is 5 plus 2 is 7. And then 1.5 times 1, 15. But notice we don't take care of the decimals until we get to the very end. We add 75 and the 5. Okay, so 5, 12, carry the 1, 2, and then we take care of the fact that we have 2 decimal places in the factors and 2 decimal places in the answers. Now, because 1.5 squared is 2.25, then the square root of 2.25 is going to be 1.5. C says 4.25 times 10. Now, what we're going to learn is that every time we multiply a decimal number by 10, we're going to shift the decimal 1 point to the right. So here we do it the long way. 4.25 times 10 is going to multiply. We get 42.5. We had 2 decimal places, and what they didn't show you is there is a 0 there. Okay, so I went ahead and did the example by hand so that you could see it. 4.25 times 10, when we multiply it out, we do get a 0 over here to the right. We start here on the right, move our decimal place 2 places to the left because the 2 places that were in the decimal factors, and we end up with 42.5 because that 0 can be canceled off of there. Okay, so here was the problem that was done in the book. Multiplying a decimal number by 10 simply shifts the decimal 1 point to the right. And then, since we're going to generalize that concept, what is 4.25 times 10,000? Well, how many places are we going to shift to the right? If 10 shifted it 1 place to the right, we count how many zeros is what we're going to do. 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros. So that's 10 to the 4th power. And we're going to shift the decimal 4 places to the right. So doing that, we're going to, okay, so you can see where I have multiplied 4.25 times 10,000. And since I have 1, 2, 3, 4 places, this decimal is going to move 1, 2, 3, 4 places to the right, and I'm going to get 42,500. Example 2. What is the cost of 0.86 pounds of cheese at $3.90 per pound? Explain why your answer is reasonable. Okay, anytime they want us to explain why our answer is reasonable, we're going to round to do that. But first of all, let's look at what is the cost. So we're going to take the 86 pounds, and we're going to take $3.90 as the price per pound. So we're going to multiply. And notice that the pounds and the price per pound, those units would cancel, and we would get 3.3540, and that's going to be rounded to $3.35. So that's going to be the amount that we're going to have to pay. The answer is reasonable. So now we're going to round. $3.90 is close to 4, okay? And this one is close to 1. So we're going to end up with something, we rounded this up, we rounded this up, so 4 would be like a maximum top because both of these are less than. And it says 3.35 is reasonable because it would be less than 4 when we rounded this up to 1 and this to 4. Now they're saying that since this is a little less than a pound, and 335 is a little less than 390, then that is reasonable. So they did it just a little bit different way. But it is a reasonable answer. So now we're on the next part of the page where it's explaining the concepts. We distinguish between dividing by a whole number and dividing by a decimal number. When we divide by a whole number, we basically, here we have this, 0.42 divided by 6. We just move the decimal right up above it and place the decimal there and then do the division just like normal. When dividing by a whole number, the decimal point in the quotient plate is placed above the decimal point in the dividend, so the decimals don't change. In this example, the quotient and the dividend have the same number of decimal places. We fill the empty places with zeros if necessary. So they're putting a 0 there. Now, let's do this one, example 3, which is very much like that one. We're going to divide by a whole number. So we're going to place the decimal right up above. And 8 goes into 48 6 times, and then we just put the decimal place right up above it. We place the decimal point in the quotient above the decimal point in the dividend. Then we divide like we divide whole numbers. We use 0 as a placeholder so that 0.06 is the quotient. So not too difficult when we're dividing by a whole number. Now, here we're dividing by a whole number again. So we're going to 4.8 divided by 5. Since there's no decimal over here, the decimal place is just going to slide up, and we would do normal division. 5 goes into 48. Well, we know 45 would be 9. 9 times 5 is 45. We subtract and get 3. We bring down the 0. 5 into 30 is 6. And we just put the decimal right up above. Okay, now we're dividing 4.8 by 10 squared. Well, 10 squared is 100, isn't it? Okay, so now we're going to have a new concept. We talked about when we're multiplying by 10 or a power of 10, we're going to move the decimal to the right. But when we're dividing by 10 or a power of 10, we're going to move the decimal to the left. So here we go. 10 squared equals 100, so we're going to divide 4.8 by 100. Again, 100 is a whole number. Look at what happens. 4.8, the decimal goes right up above, but we're dividing by 100. How many times does 100 go into 48? 0 times. So you see we have a 0 up there. 100 into 480, 4 times. And then we have 4 times 100 is... Okay, I went ahead and put the 400. 4 times 100 is 400. We subtract, we get 80. We bring down the next one. Can you see how we started with 4.8 and we ended up with the decimal place in 4.8 shifted 2 places to the left? That's what division by a power of 10 is going to do. Okay, so now we're looking at the next little bit of instruction. It says when dividing by a decimal number, we take an extra step to make an equivalent problem in which the divisor is a whole number. So we're going to turn division by a decimal into division by a whole number by multiplying both the numerator and the denominator by a power of 10, or we could think of multiplying the inside and the outside of the little house by a multiple of 10. So here, 0.42 divided by 0.6, if we multiply by 10 on the top and the bottom, that's going to move the decimal 1 to the right, move the decimal 1 to the right, and we get 4.2 divided by 6. So 4.2, we can think of it as just moving the decimal 1 place to the right and 1 place to the right. And then we can do just like we did when we were dividing by a whole number. Example 4, 3.6 divided by 0.6. So we need to adjust. We're going to multiply this one by 10 and move the decimal 1 to the right, multiply this one by 10, and it's going to end up being the same answer as 36 divided by 6. So here we go. The decimal was moved 1 to the right. The decimal was moved 1 to the right. 36 divided by 6 is 6. And we don't need to keep that decimal there because there's nothing else behind it. So the quotient is 6, which is a whole number. So the decimal point does not need to be shown. Now we're dividing by 0.06. which means we're going to have to adjust. So here's 0.06. The decimal was here. We're going to move it 2 places to the right. We're going to take this decimal, move it 2 places to the right, and 6 goes into 350 times. Chloe drove her car 236.4 miles on 9.6 gallons of gas. Find the number of miles per gallon the car averaged to the nearest mile per gallon. Okay, so here's our problem. And we're doing miles. She drove 236.4 miles on 9.6 gallons of gas. So here is the solution. To find miles per gallon, we divide miles by gallons. Since the divisor is a decimal number, we're going to take an extra step to make the divisor into a whole number. So here we're dividing by 9.6, so we're going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 10 to slide this decimal over 1 and slide this decimal over 1. So now this quotient is the same as 2,364 divided by 96. And when we do that division, we're going to get 24.625, and that is now in miles per gallon. And we're going to round that to about 25 miles per gallon. So let's look at the next one. Now this is at the very end of your lesson. This is kind of a reminder chart. So here's our memory cue. If we're adding or subtracting, we must line up the decimal. If we're multiplying, we're going to multiply the numbers without the decimal considered, and then we're going to count the decimal places and put that many decimal places in the answer. If we're dividing by a whole number, we're going to put the decimal right above where it is in the number under the box. Okay, remember that's called the dividend. And this one up here is the quotient. So the quotient decimal would be in the same spot as the dividend decimal. And then if we're dividing by a decimal, we're going to move the decimal place in the divisor over however many spots, but we have to move the decimal place in the dividend over that many spots also. And then we will put the decimal above wherever it winds up in the dividend. So it says you may need to place a decimal point to the right of a whole number and fill empty spaces with 0. So sometimes if we have a whole number, then we may have to put a decimal to the right of it so that we know where our number ends, where our whole number ends, and where we're going to have to start our decimals. Okay, so here we're on our practice problems. We're we're multiplying 0.4 times 0.12. Now I did this for you over here. 0.12 times 0.4. Now 12 times 4 is 48. If you did it long multiplication, you would still get 48. So then we have to count how many decimal places. 1, 2, and 3 numbers behind the decimal. So in the answer, 1, 2, and 3 places behind the decimal. 0.3 times 0.3 is 0.3 squared. 0.3 times 0.3. Now we know 3 times 3 is 9, and we're going to end up bringing the 9 all the way down. But we have 2 decimal places, and the answer will have 2 decimal places from the right. So 1, 2, 0.09 is the same thing as 0.3 squared. 6.75 times 10 cubed. 10 cubed is 10 times 10 times 10. 1,000 is 10 cubed. 1,000 times 6.75. Now we know that each 0 in a power of 10 is going to move the decimal place 1 place to the right. So let's see if that's what it turned out to be when we did the long multiplication. It winds up being 1, 2, 3 places to the right. So since we don't have anything there, it ends up being a 0, and that's what we had for the answer, 6,750. 0.144 divided by 6. Okay, 0.144 divided by 6. 6 goes into 14 2 times. 2 times 6 is 12. Subtract, we get a 2. We bring down the 4. 6 into 24 is 4. And notice that the decimal, we're dividing by a whole number, so the decimal goes straight up, and we get 0.024. Okay, here we're dividing by a decimal number. So we're going to have to move the decimal place 2 places over to get the decimal point to the end. And 1.2, this decimal will also have to go 2 places over. Since there's not enough numbers there, we're going to fill in with zeros, and notice that the decimal goes straight up from the dividend to the quotient. So now we're going to divide, and we get 20. Okay, so now we're on F in our practice problems. 2.4 divided by 0.5. So we have 1 decimal place here. We're going to have to move that decimal 1 to the right, and then this one over here has to also move 1 to the right. So we end up with the same thing as 24 divided by 5, which is going to go 4 whole times. 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract to get the 4, bring down a 0. Remember, we can add as many zeros after the decimal as we need to. 5 into 40 goes 8. 8 times 5 is 40 with a 0 remainder. So since our final decimal wound up here, we put it right above there in the quotient. G says use the answer to B to find the square root of 0.09. Well, in B, we found out that 0.3 times 0.3 is 0.09. So if 0.3 squared is 0.09, then the square root of 0.09 is 0.3, because don't squaring and square rooting undo each other. All right, H. What is the cost of 10.2 gallons of gas at 2.249 per gallon? So here we have our problem, 10.2 gallons times $2.249 per gallon. Now, gallons is going to cancel gallons, leaving us with dollars. That's what we're looking for. What is the cost? That's in dollars. So now, all we have to do is multiply 10.2 times 2.249. I did that for you over here. It was a long problem. And since I had 1, 2, 3, 4 decimals over here, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 decimals in the answer. So I end up with 22.9398, which we're going to round to 22.94. So $22.94 is what you would pay for that amount of gas. If 1.6 pounds of peaches cost $2, then what is the cost per pound? So we know that there's $2 for 1.6 pounds. Now, if I divide both the top and the bottom by 1.6, then won't I get just 1 pound in the denominator? And that's what we're looking for. What is the cost per 1 pound? So 2 divided by 1.6, I did that one up here, and we end up with 1.25. So $1.25 is what you would pay for 1 pound at this rate. Now we're on number 1 of our written practice. It says, Mr. Velasquez typed 16 names in 1 minute. At that rate, how many names could he type in 1.5 minutes? Okay, so I wrote your problem here. 16 names in 1 minute times 1.5 minutes. So I put a 1 on the bottom here, and I showed that our minutes are going to cancel, leaving us with names, which is what we want. So we know that 1.5 is the same as 3/2 when we put it in improper form. So we have 16 over 1 times 3/2. the 16 and the 2 will cancel, leaving an 8 and a 1. And then 8 times 3 is 24. And we have nothing on the bottom anymore, just a 1. So 24 names. Number 2. The number of students in 4 classrooms is 27, 29, 30, and 30. What is the average or the mean number of students in the 4 classrooms? So here I added all the numbers for you. 27 plus 29 plus 30 plus 30 is 116 altogether. And then to find the average, we're going to divide 116 by 4 to get 29 students as an average for each of the classrooms. Number 3, Al Orter won the gold medal in the discus in 4 consecutive Olympics, establishing a new Olympic record each time. He won his first gold medal in 1956 in Melbourne with a throw of 56.36 meters. He won his 4th gold medal in Mexico City in 1968, throwing 64.78 meters. His 1968 winning mark was how much farther than his 1958 mark? So I showed the work right here, 64.78, take away 56.36, and unfortunately I showed the work over here, but I don't think, well, maybe I can move that. I can move that little picture. Okay, so here's our work over here, and so it was 8.42 was the distance he threw farther in 1968. So he is getting better with age. Okay, so now we'll move this somewhere else. Okay, so here we have 1/2. This is number 4. We're almost done. 1/2 plus 2/3 is going to need a common denominator of 6. And so here's our 1/2. We're trying to turn it into something over 6. So 3 over 3, we're going to multiply by 1/2 to get 3 over 6, which I showed you goes right here. 2/3, we're going to multiply by 2 over 2 to get 4 over 6, which is going to give us 4 over 6. So 3 over 6 plus 4 over 6 is 7 over 6, which is 1 1/6. Now, number 5, we have 1/2 times 2/3. We're going to cancel our 2's to leave us with a 1 and a 1. And 1 times 1 is 1. And 1 times 3 is 3. So the answer is 1/3 for number 5. We're almost there. Number 6. 1/2 divided by 2/3. Now remember, when we divide by a fraction, we multiply by its reciprocal. So we're going to multiply by the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. So 1/2 times 3/2 is 3/4. The last problem. 2/3 minus 1/2. Okay, so we're going to have to turn each one of those into something with a 6 on the bottom. We'll move this down here. Okay, so 2 times 2 over 2 times 3. So we're changing this one. We wind up with 4 over 6, which we put right there. And then we're going to change the 1/2 by multiplying by 3 over 3 to get 3/6, and we're going to put that right here. So we just took 2/3 and changed it to 4/6, and we took 1/2 and changed it to 3/6. So now that we have the same denominator, 4 take away 3 is 1. The answer is 1/6. We are done with lesson 25. I hope you enjoyed it. And this is Mrs. A, and may God bless your day.